morning. And I have a panel of esteemed people who have dealt with this industry and have information in regard to where we're going. Remember, Kenya, we're already saying that we're already under debt. Now, with this lift of the interest rate cap, does it mean for you and I that we're going to go back to the dark days in as far as business is concerned? Remember that the argument, one of the arguments that has been presented for the interest rate cap to be actually a repeal is that this limited the scope of banks or other microfinances and creditors to lend to the private sector because they are risk averse. Yesterday, President Uhuru Kenyatta launched an app, Starry, to support the SMEs as far as credit is concerned. So in light of these developments, where do we stand? What next? That's the question we're having for you this morning. And just to get your feedback and just to put you into the scope of what is happening, we want to know, do you trust that the banks are not going to take advantage of the lift of the interest rate cap? Do you trust that? Or are they going to be sensitive to Wanjiko's need at a time when Kenyans are saying that the burden has become too much to bear? SMS line 2154, Twitter handle at KB's Channel 1 TV, at Ray Manyara, at Ramaguko, and at Jane Wamboy. And we're sure going to appreciate having your feedback. Now, as we are talking matters economics, matters business, we are also going to be keenly focusing on what is happening in Kibra. Remember, it is the 7th of November and constituents woke up as early as 6 a.m. to cast a vote to elect the new member of parliament, the seat that fell vacant after the demise of Ken Okoth. We have our reporters Timothy Kimdosu and Kamche Menza on ground to tell us what is happening. Just in a brief at around 6:15 this morning, Kamche said that the situation was calm, and that the numbers, there was a low turnout, maybe because of the early hour, but also IBC officials were on ground saying that this turnout was, not what they expected. So this morning we're also asking you, what are your expectations of the Kibra by-election? And we're going to be putting that question to our guests here this morning. On the other side of the studio are my guests, and I'd want them to introduce themselves so that you can get to know within which scope we're going to be having this conversation. So I'm joined by my guests. Maybe we can start off with the gentleman in the far end.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Abraham Kamau. I'm the CEO of Miradi Capital. And my career basically has spanned working for banks. So that puts me in a good position to discuss today's topic.
So in essence, you're going to be giving a brief on what is happening in the banking sector, and that are we supposed to be worried? Because this is the main question that Kenyans are asking. So now, are we most likely going to be at the mercy of the banks? You will answer that in not too long. The far end.
Good morning.
Good morning to you.
My name is Patrick Cairo. I'm a businessman in Nairobi. Different sectors, real estate, agriculture and hospitality, and definitely a good customer of Abraham.
Definitely. Private sector and the banks. So that is what we're going to be putting into perspective this morning. Remember, the SMS line is 2154. Feedback, start with the word GMK or Good Morning Kenya. If you like, tell us where it is that you're watching this broadcast from, and we're sure going to sample your feedback, your comments, and your take on what you think on the what next and what it holds for Kenya now that we have the interest rate cap that is no longer going to be effective. Now, the reason, or rather the sum of the reasons or factors, the very safe factors, why we've had this interest rate cap repealed is that reduced lending to the private sector, basically rendering it not effective, and a decline in economic growth, which is around 7.5%, against a target of 6 to 7%, then the mushrooming of Shylocks. I don't know if we start with the banker or the entrepreneur. Let's start with the entrepreneur. Do you think that these were factors enough to push this to do away with the interest rate cap?
I think first and foremost, if we look at the reasons why the rate cap was brought in the first place in 2016, was simply because the banks had run a bit amok, and the rates were already off the roof, and even then their lending to private sector was not that significant.
The banks had ran amok. Now, running amok, it means you guys were chasing immoral profit margins, if I can use that word. Abram, what do you say?
Okay. Also, I want to clarify that I'm not speaking for banks. I'm just looking at them from a perspective. Now, if you look at that time, in September 2016, when that law was enacted, the objective then was to make credit affordable. That was the word that was used. Now, in making it affordable, we paid little attention to what that would do to access. Remember, we were facing an economic problem where we were having a problem of access to credit and access to affordable credit. Now, with the moment you try to legislate an economic problem, then you create another problem. And that's what happened. Because when you cap the price of any commodity or service, what happens is you constrict the supply of it. So that means if you look at a normal demand curve and a normal supply curve, for supply, more will be supplied at a higher price, and vice versa. For demand, less will be supplied at higher prices. Okay. Now, when you cap it at 14, no, it was at 13 now because CBR had gone to 9. It meant that anybody the bank was willing to lend at above that was left out. But that did not mean that that person or people or SMEs had disappeared. So with that, because of that excess demand that cannot be serviced because of the law, now it created its own black market because those people have to be served. Remember, the banks were also willing at a certain price to give out that money. So now that market shifted there, where now we created something, a lacuna of where that is unregulated, where now we are playing. Because remember, in a situation where we're looking for credit, what takes precedent is access.
Access.
Well,
Now, before
yes.
we get through that, he said that banks had run amok. You
Yes.
said you've tried to tell us the demand curve
Yes.
here, there, what there. But that is what he felt as an entrepreneur, that then banks were pushing it too far. But before we get to, diversify
Yes.
that, let's head to Kibra, where Timothy Kipnusu is coming to us live from Kibra. And just telling us what the situation is looking like from where you are. Good morning, Kipnusu. I can see you're not dressed as warm as Kamcha was. Maybe it's because the hour's already gone. Just tell us what is happening on ground. How is the security? How is the voter turnout from where the polling station you are? Over to you, Kipnusu.
Yes, a very good morning to you, Regina Manyara, at the broadcasting house. Just as you mentioned, I'm coming to you live from Old Kibra Primary School, and the long-awaited day that has sparked heated political temperatures in this country is here, where the residents of Kibra constituency are going to decide who is going to replace the late Kibra Okoth, who died on July after a long battle with cancer. And I'm coming to you live, as I mentioned, from Old Kibra Primary School, where we expect the Orange Democratic Movement Party leader Raila Odinga, and of course the party candidate for the ODM, Imran Okoth, is going to cast his vote in this particular polling center. And of course, I'm so told Eliud Owalo, the ANC party candidate, is also going to cast his vote in this particular polling center. And early this morning, when we reached here, the polling exercise was going on smoothly. People came up in large numbers to exercise their democratic right in this particular polling center. Even as you can see, the queues are not that long, an indication that many people came very early in the morning to exercise their democratic right in this particular contest, where 24 candidates are going to battle it out in this particular election. Of course, I'm coming to you live from Makina Ward, where 28,000 registered voters from the reports from Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. And joining me now to shed more light is the ODM Secretary General, who is also the Chief Agent for this particular exercise, Edwin Sifuna. A very good morning to you, Sifuna, and many thanks for sparing your time to talk to KBC Channel 1. Good morning, Kenya. Perhaps you can tell us, how is the feeling? How is the exercise going on so far?
First of all, let me correct you. The chief agent for this particular exercise is Ruaraka MP TJ Kajwang. I'm only the agent in charge of this particular center. The exercise is going on well so far. As you can see, voters have been streaming in from morning. The stations opened on time at 6 a.m. and so far so good. I have only encountered a few incidents of voters showing up and then being told that they are either registered in some other constituency or that they are not registered at all. So there have been a few frustrations for some people. I've counted at least 5. And this is some of the things that we were trying to avoid by trying to push the IEBC to be able to release the voters register. It is quite unfortunate that it took a court order that came late in the night for them to be able to now release a register. But you see, it is of little help for me if you give me a register in the dead of the night and the polling stations open at 6 a.m. So it's quite unfortunate. Some of these things we would have sorted them out if we had that information, because one thing that the IEBC does not know is that Kenyans don't trust them. But Kenyans trust their leaders, they trust the leaders of their political parties. It is easier for a member of the public to come to me than to go to Chebukati to ask him questions about the register. So this is something they have to understand. When we as political parties, because we are stakeholders in this process, when we ask for these things, it is not that we want to do anything sinister with them. It is because we serve a broader constituency than the IBC will ever have. Yeah.
Perhaps also can tell us, you are the media and you are furious about the candidates. Of course, we know NASA, the ANC party, and of course also the Ford Kenya. They are fronted candidates in this particular exercise. You've been very vocal about this thing. What's your message about this as the Orange Democratic Secretary General?
I think today as the ODM we are going to let our voters speak for us, just like we allowed them to speak for us in Ganda Ward. You know, there's a lot of noise. There's people who like to generate a lot of noise and smoke, and you will imagine that there's actually a fire. But there is really nothing. At the end of this exercise, we want the people of Kibra to understand that when all the choppers have gone away, all the big guns have gone away, all the smoke, all the noise, all the live bands, the performances, it is really about them and their children. And this is why we're asking them that they come out in large numbers to cast their vote. At the end of the day, those of us who are strangers in this constituency will just go away. And then they will be left here with the issues that they face every day, and they will want a leader to be able to tackle those problems for them.
Also, can you talk about the issue about the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission transmitting the results manually and not electronically as it's supposed to be?
Actually, in the law, the only results that are transmitted electronically are the presidential elections, the presidential results. So it is nothing out of the ordinary for them to say that there will be no electronic transmission here. Kufikia mwendo wa saa moja, sisi kwa sababu we have all our agents here, we have a tallying system. By 7 o'clock, we should be able to know who the winner is. Yeah, so we are not worried about that. We just want the voters to come out. And anybody who thinks that is going to play games with the people of Kibera, we are telling him that we are vigilant. We have put proper measures to ensure that shenanigans are not played on the people of Kibera. Okay,
your last message. Of course, we know Kibera is known to be very chaotic, and maybe there is a particular resident of Kibera who maybe he's not eager to come to vote because maybe he feels that there will be a bit of chaos because there was some cards going on about the issue of security in this place.
I don't think it is fair for you to characterize the people of Kibra or Kibra constituency as chaotic. I don't think that you have any foundation to make that allegation. The people of Kibra are very peaceful. You have seen they have opened their doors to everyone who has come to campaign here. The campaign has been largely peaceful, although there have been incidences here and there of some people who come from Western to come and misbehave here. But they usually are very peaceful people. You can see the voting is going on very peacefully. So don't characterize the people of Kibera as violent. They are very peace-loving people. And we know that at the end of this particular exercise, they are going to choose somebody who's going to work for them the way that Ken Okoth was working for them.
The last message as the party or the Secretary General of ODM to
let the voters come out. I can guarantee you that if the people of Kibera come out and express themselves, I have no doubt in my mind that they will make the right decision and that we will be victorious by the end of the day today. Yeah.
Many thanks indeed. There you have it, Regina. That is the Orange Democratic Movement Secretary General Edwin Sifuna, just telling us on how the exercise is going on. Of course, he has faulted Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission for taking it long to present the register for the Kibra by-election. Remember, there was a legal battle between the Orange Democratic Movement Party and, of course, the Independent Electoral Boundaries Commission about out the register, and of course the High Court ordered the IBC to present the ODM, the IBC to present the papers, the register voters here in Kibra to the ODM party. And of course we are keeping an eye, just as you mentioned, I've mentioned earlier, and of course the Secretary General Edwin Sifuna has mentioned, security has been beefed up here in Old Kibra Primary School, and we of course are keeping a tab on what is happening. Remember, as I've mentioned also, 28,585 registered voters are going to cast their votes here in Makina Ward, and of course 118 registered voters here in Kibra are going to cast their votes in this particular exercise to determine who is going to be the next member of parliament in Kibra, taking over from Ken Okoth, who succumbed to cancer on July. Of course, we are remaining with 33 months. Whoever is going to take this position is going to have 33 months before Kenyans again go to the ballot to elect another leader in this particular constituency. Remember, the late Okoth only worked for the Kibra residents on, for 23 months. That is just very few times that he has worked for the Kibra residents. And of course, just before I let it go to you in the broadcasting house, I'm joined by one particular agent just to tell us just a bit of what is happening here in Kibra. It's called Suleiman Omar. Just to tell us, just welcome to you're live in KBC Channel 1. Kindly tell us at what time you are here as an agent, and how the exercise is going on.
Okay, my name first is Honorable Omar Swale from Bungoma. I'm here as an ANC agent. I was here as early as 5:30. The polling center was open. Security was enough here. The NYS were here, the AP and the Kenya police. And what I can say is, so far, for the first time in Kibra, we are seeing some democracy being felt on the ground, because we haven't seen anything anomalies in the ground. So far, what I can say is the people of Kibra, for the first time, they are going to make their choice without being pushed like it used to be. Like people used to say, oh, bedrooms, nini. That thing, so far, I've not seen anything like that. So far, everything is just going well. Though the turn-up it's still too low. I don't know why. Maybe it is because today it's a weekday, and around, I think by around 4 p.m. is when people will be coming in good number.
Thank you. There you have it, as one of the agent of ANC party that is, of course, have fronted the candidate, that's Eliud Owalo. It's called Suleiman Swale, who is telling us just a bit of what is happening here in Kibra constituency. We will be keeping an eye on what is happening. As I've mentioned, the Orange Democratic Party leader, Raila Odinga, will be casting his vote at 11:30 here in this particular polling center. Remember, we have 118 polling, 183, I beg your pardon, polling centers across this particular constituency. But half of the polling centers will be under attend just because of the ongoing Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education examination. The Kibra residents have been voting from those schools where the candidates are sitting for their examination. That's what we have for now. Of course, we'll be keeping a tab on what is happening and getting residents who have voted to tell us how the exercise has been going on in this particular polling center. From me, Timothy Kipnusu, I hand you back to studio, Regina Manyara.
Now, thank you very much, Timothy Kipnusu, for that update. And you've had an interview there with the Secretary General of ODM, Edwin Sifuna there. Tough speak, calling on constituents there in Kibra to come out in large numbers and elect the new member of parliament. And I like what he has said is that we already have a misconception that Kibra is an area where people are, misbehaved, violent, and he said that is not the case. Could you kindly tell us about the security measures that have been put in place to ensure that this exercise is run smooth? Now that it opened its doors at 6 a.m., we're already into the almost 2 hours into this exercise. What is the security situation down there where you are?
Thank you, Regina. Just as I've mentioned, and of course also the Secretary General of ODM, Edwin Sifuna, we've seen security personnel, they're here just ensuring that in case of any eventuality, they're going to tackle it. And of course, just as we also mentioned, and also Sifuna has mentioned, Kibra is not a chaotic area. He has rubbished the claims that it's a chaotic area. And of course, 2 police officers from each polling station have been manned to ensure that the exercise goes on smoothly in this particular polling center. If my cameraman can just pan, of course, is showing you what is happening. The security personnel, they're actually very vigilant because in any exercise in this particular republic, we have people who normally come to the polling centers not to vote, but just to cause chaos and disrupt the ongoing process. And of course, the issue of voter bribery, we have not witnessed. Of course, the security personnel is very much alert to tackle any case of insecurity and, of course, voter bribery, Regina.
Thank you very much, Timothy. We just want to release you. You've already said that Kibra constituency has already 183 polling stations, and would want to know who is voting where and what time. Thank you for that update, where we're expecting the Premier there, Raila Odinga, to be casting his vote from Kibra Primary there at around 11:30. I'm sure we'll have him on camera. And also we'll be keen to focus on where Mariga casts his vote, as well as Eli Duwalo and Imran Okoth going forward. Now we release you. Maybe you can just have another, walk around, see what is happening, and we'll come back to you in not too long. Now, if you're tuning in, as we're focusing on Kibra, we're also talking about matters economy. And what happened on Tuesday has set the ball rolling in as far as the economy is concerned and where credit is concerned. Remember, we're already overburdened, as people are saying. Now, with doing away with the interest rate cap, what next? This is our question this morning. And do you believe that banks are going to put in consideration, or rather take into consideration, the needs and wants of Wanjiko during this kind of time? Thank you very much, Caleb Mkendi, for joining us this morning. All right. Before you came on board, we were just trying to look at the reasons behind the scrapping, or rather the repeal of the interest rate cap. Yep. The entrepreneur who seated next to you there, that is Patrick Munene, says that was not reason enough because banks, as usual, ran amok, and that's why we had the interest rate cap. Yep. Now we're here. He's tried to explain the issues of demand and supply in as far as our labor market is concerned. But 20%, 30% of interest rate, that was too much for most Kenyans. Yep. So what options do we have? And maybe we can start off with asking you this question from an economics point of view. Do you think banks are going to be responsible now that the interest rate cap has been done away with?
I think a lot has been done, especially during this time of interest rate cap. We've had some developments in the banking sector. There's a banking sector charter that has been championed by the Central Bank of Kenya. There's also a lot of new initiatives, especially that are centered around the customer, to just enable more customer-friendly interactions with the bank. So I think there will be an increase in interest rates, definitely, because of the lifting of the cap, but I do not expect to see the mid to higher 20s immediately, at least. That's my expectation. That's
your expectation? Because data from the CBK shows that on average by around May 2019, this year, we were doing around 12.47. So when you say we're expecting an increase in interest rate, what are we looking at?
Anything between 3 to 5, 6 percentage points above the 13%. So we're looking at maybe between 16 to 18 to 18, 19 for the risky clients.
Now, Patrick, from an entrepreneur point of view, what is going through your mind? Because private sector has been denied credit as by banks because they are risk averse during this interest rate cap. So are you seeing now with this lift that are they going to lend to the private sector? And does the private sector have there's a willingness to pay and the capacity to pay?
I think definitely there'll be an increase in the rates, but what we know is going to happen, which happened before, is unless government borrowing is tamed, then you will have a situation where the rates will actually go north of 20%. And the reason is because banks naturally are definitely risk averse, But even more is that it's a very small pool of banks, playing in the Kenyan market. Even if their numbers are about 43 banks in Kenya, you find that those who are dictating the market are actually very few. So what you have is more or less like a monopoly kind of game going around. And the reason why I believe the rate cap has actually flopped is actually by design by these banks, where they starved, and you could see even the kind of profits they were reporting was significantly high. So they just starved the private sector. And what they'll do now is just release a small portion to keep the private sector busy. But ideally, by the time they're reporting their results next year, we'll still have the same challenges.
Abraham, I can see you, do you think that this, first of all, there's something that Patrick there has mentioned, is that he believes that this was a deliberate move by the banking sector to have the rate cap done away with. Secondly, that starving off the private sector was also another deliberate move, and that he does not believe that banks are going to be responsible in as far as giving, more realistic interest on loans. What's your take?
You see, I agree with Patrick on one thing. You see, banks are private institutions. So I don't think they owe us any moral duty. They're here to make money. So given that, they have shareholders who want a return. Now, if you look at the regime when the interest rates were under control, they changed their model. So what happened? They took deposits and put them in government paper, treasury bills, treasury bonds. If you look at the average liquidity in the banks, it was running something above 50%, which meant, because remember when you're doing your liquidity returns, any investment in government paper counts for liquidity. So it meant about, because the statutory limit is 20%, yes, and they're running 50 plus. So that means that about 30% was going to government in terms of paper. Now, come the removal of the rate cap. As a person sitting in a bank, why would I want to change our winning formula? If that is still working, they'll still continue that route. That's my opinion. And secondly, for that trend to stop, then there would have to be a deliberate government monetary policy intervention to start driving down the CBR towards as low as possible. And remember, that has happened before, where the interest rates on government paper was driven so low that it became unattractive. And now the only other asset that the banks could build out of the deposit liability was lending, build a book. And remember, that's the time when there were a lot of personal loans and secured loans. There were tents all over. People were calling you and telling you qualify for loans. So again, as I told you, these are private institutions. They owe us no duty. They are there for their shareholders first. So for them to go in a certain direction, there must be a monetary policy intervention. And I remember what I said. We made a mistake of legislating an economic problem. That's why we went wrong. That's why eventually it has flopped. And we are back to where we started. And remember, the problem that made us go into this law has not been solved, which was affordability, which was access to affordable credit.
Yes.
That has not been solved. So we are back to where we were. So now let's try something different. Let's go the monetary policy way. Because for as long as government continues to have appetite, the kind of appetite it has for local debt, then if this rate cap, if you look very carefully, they are one of the biggest beneficiaries.
True.
Yes.
Right. Now, from an economic point of view, we've talked about a monetary policy intervention. But now that is in as far as government is concerned and ensuring that banks do not run amok, if I can borrow words put there by the entrepreneur. Yeah. What options are out there for Wanjiku? Now, when I say what options are out there by Wanjiku, a report that was released in beginning of this year showed that Kenyans borrowed almost 1 million shillings in a span of 1 month. That was in January. I mean, on the mobile apps. Yeah. Kenyans are borrowing. Yep. This has supported the disruptive fintechs. So with this kind of situation right now where we find ourselves, what options is Wanjiku most likely to take?
Well, as I said, during the interest rate cap, there were a number of beneficiaries. One of them was the mobile lenders, the financial services that they can lend through your mobile phone. I think especially for customers who are denied credit from the commercial banks, that was one of the best avenues to access credit. However, as you know, it's still at a high interest rate, almost predatory. If you look at it from an annual point of view, somewhere in between the 90 to 100%. This was owing to the state that borrowers were in, because you have denied credit on one side, so you're able to, or you say that's the only alternative that you have. However, in the long run, I think these alternative sources of credit, if they can rein in the exorbitant interest rates, it shall be one of still remain one of the best avenues, or one of the good avenues to access credit. I think alternative avenues apart from bank funding should also be looked at in a more serious manner, possibly legislate towards that, so that even those interest rates are not too high, because
regulation of fintechs. That's what I'm hearing you saying. Yeah?
Yes, regulation of fintechs, of other unregulated mobile or lenders, basically. Yeah.
So are you likely to see now, because now it was easy to get a loan on a touch of a button on your mobile phone.
Yeah.
Now the interest rate cap has been lifted. Now banks are willing to give, maybe at a higher interest rate. Do you see Kenyans' appetite to borrow on mobile phone apps going down or up, or is it just going to remain the same, or is it too early to predict?
In the short term, I think first of all, because the interest rates are still the same on this other side, I think you as a customer, you'll be more inclined to try your commercial bank. There are a lot of I'll say avenues to do this. There's a total cost of credit website that has all the 40 or so banks that offer loans. So you can just go on that website and see basically if I qualify for a loan, what interest rate that I'll be able to get across the banks, and look for one that is the most attractive to you. So I think first of all, customers will be more inclined to go the commercial bank way. If their credit score is still good, as opposed to the mobile lender. So I think the lifting of the interest rate cap in the short term will actually affect their business models.
Now, we cannot talk about issues of interest rate without looking at another issue that is we're going still to be debating about. The raising of the debt ceiling to 9 trillion shillings. Whoa, yes, that's where we are. That's where we are. And we've been talking about the government's appetite, borrowing appetite.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's start from here. What's your take on that?
You see, the law before this was enacted, the law before that was that you shall not borrow more than 50% of your GDP. By the time they made the amendment, our debt was at 5.8 trillion. Our GDP was less than 10 trillion, which meant that we were already in breach of that law.
Yes.
So two things. One, they had to amend the law to be compliant. Now, they moved from a ratio to an absolute number. They moved from 50% of GDP to 9 trillion as an absolute ceiling. So there are questions about why not 10 trillion, why not 11, why not 7? How was 9 trillion arrived at? Number one. Number two, there are not very clear checks as to how fast or how slow we can get to that 9 trillion.
Sure.
The way the law is written, we can actually chunk it all now.
Immediately we pass it, we
Yes,
can
we-
get our
we-
9
we
trillion.
can-
And I highly suspect, but hey, that's just my opinion.
And the highest, and now the most critical factor is, if we're struggling with 5.960 is where we are now, what would we do with 9 trillion?
Good question.
And the critical part remains always, debt per se is not a problem. There are countries that borrow several times their GDP.
Yes.
The critical part is the debt, does it come to purchase capital goods that are able to generate cash to pay and keep something for the economy? That question is the problem. So if this portion that we are, the headroom that we have of about 3T, if we can put it to use in such a way that the assets that they put in will create a cash flow that has to be more than to also take care of some of the debt that is constituted in the 60 that we are sitting on today. Because as a nation, we have to continue to be able to service this debt going forward. Remember, Kenya is a sovereign state, and Kenya will be there in perpetuity. Long after all, we are all gone.
Yes.
But those debts will remain. So it's high time we had a very decent conversation of exactly how we want to deal with that monster. Because raising the limit, okay, if we get to 9 trillion, then what are we going to do again?
Good question. Before you get to answer
Yes.
that question, Abraham there has raised pertinent questions. First of all, it's still uncertain the duration in which we have to take to achieve that 9 trillion. we're struggling with 6 trillion as it is, and the issue is debt servicing.
Yep.
From an entrepreneur, Patrick, what do you think about that?
Yes, I think what we are likely to see, which is exactly what happened when we had the rate cap, is again government crowding out private sector. This headroom they have gotten of about 3 trillion shillings must come from somewhere.
Yes.
The 6 trillion that is already borrowed, they're going to look at getting some concessional loans, which unless they have already been negotiated, may take a bit of time before they come into play. So this extra 3 trillion, they're going to borrow it from somewhere. If they go outside to development partners, they'll be given a couple of conditions and so on and so forth. So the fastest place they're going to pick up this money is the domestic market. And then now is why we are very worried that definitely interest rates will go north of 20%.
Khalil, what do you say from that aspect? We've already, yes, we have a headroom, 3 trillion. We don't care about that we're struggling with the 6 trillion as it is. We have a headroom to borrow. Why? Because one of the reasons that have been given by government to want to create more headroom in terms of debt is to support development projects. Development projects. That is one of the reasons that has been given.
Yeah.
Now here we are. From a private sector point of view, the private sector is worried that this move is going to crowd out the private sector. Interest rates are likely to shoot up.
Yeah.
What do you, from an economic point of view?
I think that is, I agree with my colleagues. Initially, even in this financial year, I think from the local market, the government is looking to raise around 300 billion, which is still an increase from last year. And now also with the repeal of the interest rate cap, the government will also have to compete for these funds with the private sector. That usually will result in an increase in interest rates, which will definitely also affect the debt servicing once we get down the road. In terms of the headroom from 5.8 to 9, channeling these funds into infrastructure and development projects is usually ideal. However, these projects also have to be vetted in terms of are they going to generate cash flow? Are they going to generate income, lead to economic output, and be able to justify the debt service, the debt that they've taken on?
Now, there's a question that most analysts have been asking is that why do you think Treasury, from where you sit, chose to pick commercial loans, and yet we had a provision for concessional loans that are long-term and cheaper? Why do you think Treasury took that move when it did?
You see, again, as Patrick was saying, it's about the path of least resistance. When you need money today, a concessional lender will not be here today because they have concessional lender have processes. So the easiest guy to go to is a guy who will give you on commercial terms. But just to add something also on these debts, you see, most of these funds are being used for infrastructure projects. Now, an infrastructure project will not have a financial return. An infrastructure project will have an economic return, and that's where the problem is. An economic return may take longer to kick in. Let's say a road from here to Mombasa. A road from here to Mombasa will not give you a financial return. Roads are not made to, but the kind of economic activity they spur grows the economy, and then from that you can tax and create income out of it. So I think it is that disconnect. Sometimes that when you're holding our discussions, we're trying to force an economic project to give you a financial return. But also in our planning, we have to be aware of that this project, there'll be no cash flow out of it. So we must factor how are we going to pay for this debt as we wait for this project to kick into the economy. So it's all about in our planning and making sure that every coin that is borrowed goes to a capital project. Because the worst thing that can ever happen is for us to borrow to consume, to pay salaries, or basically sunk costs. Because that's what you're literally doing is borrowing yourself deeper and deeper in. Because going forward, we have to, as Patrick had said, we have to refinance some of the debts we have. The commercial debts must be retired in favor of concessional, long-term, with better moratorium and better terms. Because if we took our 60 and got a consortium of lenders to give us a 5-year break and a 40-year term, maybe at 1%, all this heat would go down.
True.
And we'll not be the first to do that. Yeah, it's been done.
So that's the direction you think we need to take.
We have to
now,
go
Patrick, from a private sector point of view, there are already jitters within the market because of what the lift of the interest rate cap. To survive, because we have to survive. We're here to survive.
We must.
What options are there for the private sector going forward? Are we looking at options of SACCOs, microfinance, fintech? Where are you looking at in terms of surviving, in terms of, now with government, we already know that it might crowd the private sector from getting those commercial loans because they have to, as you've said, development. What do you think? What options are there?
I believe banks are going to lend, that's for sure, but not too much. And where the problem will start now catching up with the entire economy as a whole is because when government borrows, what it does is increase its deficit, fiscal deficit. And normally what we have been seeing the last 5-6 years has been an economic growth driven by government borrowing, by government projects, not by private sector. And that is why you're finding so many job losses, a very little job creation happening, because the private sector is not the one driving the economic growth. If the private sector is allowed to drive economic growth, then you'll have jobs, you'll have government revenue going up, they'll be able to collect more taxes. But this can only happen if there's access to credit, because without access to credit, then private sector's lifeline is completely shut.
So you agree with Abraham and says we need government intervention in terms of the monetary policy, so that we can try and see and limit, make it more affordable. That's what you said?
Yes, make it more affordable. But really, I think even with the tools which have been there, with the monetary policy and so on, it's still an issue of, does government have the discipline? That's a long and short.
Does government have the discipline?
Yeah.
Now, because we cannot speak for government, whether it has discipline or not, we need to know how to survive. Caleb, I'm imagining, let's give a case in point, someone who has a startup. They need a capital of around 500,000 K right now to start their business. What would you be telling them at this point with this current situation? In terms of investment?
Well, they do need capital for them to proceed. So I think that given the interest rate cap, if they were not eligible or not eligible, if they were not getting access to credit during the time of the interest rate cap, now the repeal, I think they can relook at bank funding and bank debt as one of the means to get financing. Other means we know is things like raising capital from shareholders, getting other concessional loans. But really, bank funding in Kenya is around 90% of total funds. So usually that's the route that most entrepreneurs and commercial enterprises go through. So
now, there's someone, when we asked the question on social media, maybe I can get that response. They were saying that they do not trust the banks, they'd rather do mattress banking. They'd rather do mattress banking. Yes. Why? Because they're not so sure that they can trust the banks with their money. And they're asking now if, first, the question that they asked, there's someone who says, good morning, I'm Lavan Zinjor, tuned in from Kiambu town. Great show. Good morning. Someone, Arnold Onyuk, says, I'm watching from Naivasha too. I have a question. What happens to the existing loan facility that one already has? Is this affected with the new directive?
Yes, I think it's affected. Yeah, with the lifting, because they did. I don't think they put any safeguard in
terms of whether it's going to be retrospective or not.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's still a grey area.
Yeah, it's a grey area.
And they need to come out clearly whether this thing is going forward or it's going to affect even the existing contract.
Okay, well, Arnold, you've had that response there from our panel there that says still a grey area because we did not get to discuss that. Yeah. Then someone says, good morning, Jane and Ray and everyone else. Thank you for the panel. We're watching from Meru. Now, another question is, in terms of investment, how does this make us look as Kenya, our current debt? How does it affect our attractiveness to investors?
Well, basically, international investors will still look at the debt to GDP ratio. The level that is usually considered as debt distress is when you get to 70%. of debt to GDP. I think with the 5.8 trillion, assuming our GDP is anywhere within 8.5 to 9, we're around, let's say, almost 60%. So we still have a
Some 10% headroom.
some 10% headroom.
Positive vibes, just as the CBK governor was saying that, hey, we are not on the red, we're fine. There are people who are doing even 80 to 90% to GDP, and they are surviving. Now, as we come to a conclusion, we've already said that, yes, 90% of credit comes from banks, and here we are with the interest rate. Private sector is worried that government is going to crowd it out, make interest rates very high, and we've said that is a low of demand, and that is it. But are we likely to see growth in private sector with this kind of situation that we found ourselves in going forward? Maybe in the next, maybe 6 months. 6 months, at a time like maybe March, would you be able to is it too early? What are your expectations going forward, especially where the private sector is concerned? Because, and especially SMEs, we are focusing on SMEs. Maybe start from Caleb coming this way.
Okay, I think we'll see some pickup, especially okay, during this is almost towards the tail end of business for this financial year, but come January, I think with more lending towards the private sector, more SMEs and MSMEs accessing credit, they'll be able to ramp up their businesses. If it's expansion, if it's just growth, it will be there.
So positive growth, too early to tell. Let us talk in March, April there to see what happens. Patrick, what do you think?
I think we'll have some slow growth because already, like I've said, the economic growth we're experiencing at the moment is purely driven by government projects, government debt. So until these resources, this capital is now rerouted to the private sector, is only when we shall start seeing a pickup of the economy. Because today, even if you're an SME and you need 500,000 shillings, if you borrow 500,000 shillings to put in your stock, and the general population is virtually broke and they're not buying, then definitely you'll end up in a problem because you'll not have anybody to purchase.
The private sector is pointing fingers at government right there.
I think, and this is something the governor alluded to, I think we need to see a more of a trickle down of economic growth to the person, because, and that's what is termed economic development, because economic development is the extent to which economic growth trickles down to the person. And that alludes to something Patrick said earlier about participation. You see, you only feel the economic growth if you are a participant. But the growth that we've been developing has mostly been infrastructural. So the players have been few and far apart. So we need to bring it down so that where we have more participation, number one, and that in effect what it will do, it will put more money in the household pockets. When you have more money in household pockets, then they'll start driving demand. And once they drive demand, then that's what will spur SME growth. In terms of when there's demand, you produce for the market.
Now someone just to, it's a very funny comment, I don't know what they meant. So on Twitter we were asking you, like, do you trust the banks not to take advantage of the interest rate cap, Ripple? And the SMS line is 2154. Someone called Simon Odogi says, say BBI. I don't know what you mean, Simon, when you say BBI. What do you think he's trying to say there when you say BBI? Yeah, your silence is as good as mine, but we all know what's going on. So issues of government expenditure, borrowing, recurrent expenditure, borrowing to do X, Y, Z. So in conclusion, we can say that we are set for tough times.
I think it's too early even to tell.
It's too early.
Yeah,
still a gray area.
Everybody's holding their breath because once bitten, twice shy. So I think that the thing that even the banks or government has to work on is the population's perception of banks.
Perception.
Because the perception is that the worst will happen. Most likely it will not, but perception always carries the day. Yes,
okay, now because we are having our, a by-election happening in Kibra, and yes, you're Kenyans, you may not be, I don't know if you're registered voters in Kibra, maybe you're keeping your way from casting your votes there. But what is your expectation? What is your expectation with this by-elections? Let's start with Caleb. What are your expectations?
I haven't got a view per se. I'll just say for the voters to come out, exercise your democratic right, and elect someone who will take the the constituency forward. Though it has been, it's a political hotspot for now.
He's trying to be politically correct. So we can see inclined to business. You don't want to get into matters politics. So Patrick, what are your expectations? Kibra by-elections, 24 aspirants there. Kibra has been the center stage of matters politics. Look at what happened during the post-election violence. We have the premier hailing for being an MP himself in his heydays. Here we are, Kenokoth, someone trying to fill his position. We've had the talk of things in my bedroom. You know, and that. What are your expectations?
I think the late Kenokoth was quite a progressive leader, and he achieved quite much in his time. And what would have expected naturally from a by-election where his brother is now contesting would have been more of a sympathy kind of vote. But from what we have seen during this campaign period is that the Kibra election has become a battle of titans, and it's now more of a political contest as opposed to a sympathy kind of swing vote. Yeah. So we expect an upset. I believe all the candidates are significantly have something to offer. But I think with the big titans battling it out, we are waiting to see. I think today evening,
I'll ask you, what are your expectations?
My expectations are definitely there might be an upset.
An upset.
Kibra, yeah.
You are politically correct. There's an upset there. Abraham, what's your take?
You know, there's been a lot of analysis about what could happen, and there's a saying that goes that if you torture data long enough, it confesses. and we see, so there are all manner of scenarios that have been painted. But for me, sitting as a Kenyan, what I would wish and pray is that they get who they deserve at the end of the day. I don't know who that is going to be. I believe in God, and may God give them who they deserve.
Yeah.
Yes.
A leader is chosen comes from God. Yeah. That's what we say. Yeah. So this morning we've been putting into perspective the issue of the interest rate cap and the overall impact it is going to have in the economy. And just a few take-homes is that from our speakers here, we've had an economist. All of them have a background in economy. We have someone who's speaking for the bank, someone who's speaking for the private sector, and someone who's just giving us an overview of how the economy has been, where we think it's heading. So some of the take-homes is that we need an intervention from government, and government needs to check its appetite for debt, and we need to have a better strategic, or rather apply strategies and policies that are going to not to apply undue pressure, especially when it comes to debt servicing as it is. We take up more concessional loans and commercial loans. The private sector is already very jittery now with this headroom that we want to give, a 3 trillion kind of headroom, and government is likely to borrow. So interest rates are likely to come up. Private sector saying that we need to check what we're doing as far as government is concerned. Now that is Patrick Munene Karo, who is the CEO of Amboseli Court Limited, who's an entrepreneur in agribusiness and the hospitality industry. We have Caleb Mugendi at the far end, who is the assistant head of the investment at Saiton. Karibu Tena once again. Then we have Abraham Muthoga from Miradi Capital. Welcome. Thank you very much for giving your view, and let's wait and see, because we've already agreed that there are a few gray areas, especially with existing credit facility already, but I tend to think goodwill, my opinion now. You didn't ask it, but I'm giving you. In my opinion, I tend to think that we need to focus, and we need to focus on that we don't have to backtrack. Let's go forward, because that will actually defeat why we even had the interest rate cap in 2016. And anyway, thank you very much. I'd want to hand you over to the other side of the studio with my colleague Jane Momboy to just give us an overview. Remember, we are monitoring our social media platforms. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have the SMS line at 2154. The pertinent, or rather areas of focus this morning, have been the issue of the interest rate cap repeal, and also what is happening down in Kibra. We have our reporters Kipnusu and Kamche, who are on ground keeping us abreast of what is happening. Remember, we have 183 polling stations there. We expect that the Premier Raila Odinga is going to be casting his vote at 11:30 this morning, and also we're going to be keeping tabs on where the rest of the other aspirants are going to be casting their votes. Remember, there are 24 of them. So Kibra is indeed a showdown. Now we cross over to Jay.
Now, before we actually get to look at some of the tweets concerning the Kibra by-election, let me just sample some of the tweets in regards to your discussion, the interest rate cap. And there's one, Jay Bundi on Twitter. He's saying this is the kind of mentality that our parliamentarians have. You know, use money to have power, create a crisis in the economy, let people be broke, lend to them on crazy interest rates, then make more billions. All right? We have the socialist who is saying, this is the thing, yeah? First, we need to start by recalling all those MPs who did not attend yesterday's passing of the interest rate cap. Let the media houses tell us how many MPs and their names who skipped the motions in parliament, and we can deal with them from Muku Mashinani. Then he used a word that I cannot use on live TV. Now, there's also here we have Faith Mwangi here who's saying, yesterday they had a chance to shoot down the repeal by having a 230 member threshold to vote against it. The present members were only 161. This tells us the kind of leaders that we have. This is just an image of what was happening yesterday. Charlie here on Twitter says, @BeingCharlie says, this is the price of an incompetent legislature and an impotent executive in a series of non-coherent and disruptive economic policies. One last one from Omari KU who says, maybe it is not all up to the politicians. Maybe we as the citizens, as the public, also have a role to play in this outcome. Well, that is just some but of what we have received so far in regards to this discussion. And also the African nationalists saying on the interest rate cap issue, we need to internalize the fact that choices have consequences. We cannot populate the parliament with cowards and self-seekers and expect different results from these masters or any change. Well, that is what we have received so far. And keep talking to us. Remember, we're still following up on what is happening in the Kibra by-elections. Our reporters will be linking up with them in a bit. But for now, let us take a very quick commercial break. We'll be right back. This is Good Morning Kenya. Do stay with us.